We are in the Tzurba in volume 19. We are in Shir Bet Hilchot of Tochein. Tochein is, what is Tochein? Grinding. Yehuda, right? Eliyahu or Yehuda? Yehuda. Yehuda. So Yehuda says that Tochein is grinding. He's right. Now it's one of the melachot of Shabbat is grinding something. What does grinding mean? And how do we understand it? Well, in the times of the Mikdash, when they were building the Mishkan, in order to make the curtains and color the curtains, the colors of the Mishkan, they needed the colors, you would take certain herbs and you would have to grind them, make them into like a flour, and then you would use this. Okay, so let's take a look on page 73 from Menuhat Ahavam as he explains what is Tochein. Melechet Tochein hi achat men lamed tat avot melachot ha'asurot min haTorah b'Shabbat. Well, Tochein is one of the 39 that are asur on Shabbos. What is the mihus? What is the melacha? The melechet Tochein hi chalukos guf echad legufim dakim harbe. Okay, so the way Menuchalav explained is that the melacha of Tochein is taking one item and breaking it up into many small pieces. Dash is threshing, right? Which was to remove the garbage from around the fruit. Tochein is when you're taking it and you're grinding it into small pieces. Okay, again, the malacha of Tochein he chalukos guf echad legufim dakim harbe, to take one item and to break it up into many items. Okay, kigon, such as taking the simimanim, taking the herbs, and that was what they did in the Mishkan. Now, atoichin chitim, if you take chitim, right, wheat, and you grind it with a mill, if you take spices or dye and you grind it with a mortar, right, that is the av melacha v'chayev. The av melacha is taking wheat and using the mill to grind the wheat, or taking something and actually using the keli for grinding for that keli. But he writes further. But if you cut dak bisakin yarek talusha eitzim talushim, or if you cut very finely a vegetable or a fruit, guess what? This is also the isser. In fact, taking wood and creating sawdust by using a saw to the wood to create sawdust, that on Shabbos is also Tochein. It's also grinding. All right, so if you take a metal rod and you do something to it to cut it to make it into small pieces, those are all considered toldot of Tochein. And again, in the halacha, it makes no differences with told or ab and your chayim. And his last two lines over there, shebekol ela po'olot harehu hoifech good echad. He takes one guf legufim dakim harbe, and he makes a lot of pieces from it. Okay, so the Menuhat Ahava in explaining the malacha of Tochein is that it take one item and you make it many, many small items. Okay, a lot of questions on this. What is considered many small items? What is considered small, right? So as we go through, hopefully we'll get some more definitions.
But getting the spot in time.
Right? Are you saying that might have been Malach of Tochein? Not really, because it's you take the guf echad and you turn it into many gufim. Here it means that etzem, that guf itself. But the frog was, you hit the frog and more frogs came out, but the frog still existed. The guf of the frog was still there, so maybe that wasn't. You can't consider that. But let's take a look now in the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat on page 74 in our books. What is Tochein? What's an example of Tochein? Hi, man the parim silka hayiv mishum tochen. Person who does parim to beets, right? If you translate of beets being, again, Chavavagic translates silka as spinach, right? Well, either or, someone who does this thing called parim to silka is hayiv mishum tochen. Or Ramanasha, hi man disalitziliti. This is a guy who chops wood, right? Chayiv mishum tochen. Okay, so you have two examples in the Gemara: beets or spinach, whichever one you want to say it is, and wood. Now, what does this mean? The parim silka. What does this mean? What is he doing? Parim silka. He's doing something to the beet or spinach. What is he doing? So says Rashi, he cuts it finely. He makes it very cut small. That's what Rashi says. What it means. Parim silka. And the salit silti, this is he takes etzem dakim lahavir eish. He makes thin wooden pieces to burn in the fire. So he has a big piece of wood and he turns it into thin pieces. And he wants to put that for the fire. So that is tochein. Splitting wood. Okay, I didn't know that. That's the phrase, splitting wood. Okay, so he splits wood on Shabbat. That is tochein. And so says the Rambam. Dak dak. The dak is only for vegetables. The dak is only for vegetables. It's very thin, very small as for vegetables. Anything else would be if you take it from a big and you turn it smaller, that would be already that. But because when it comes to vegetables, I'm allowed to cut it with a knife. So then you're saying it's tochen. So which point? So we say when it's dak, and when it's very finely cut.
If you make it sawdust, I understand. And here you're not really...
He's saying thin wooden pieces, but it still is. It still is. Okay.
Flour. Not, when I think of tochen, I think like making flour.
Oh. So you're going to see the Rabbeinu Chanan in a moment. You're right. Okay. So the Rambam says, so the Rambam here says you cut the vegetable very finely. That is tochen. Now he uses a lashon levashlo to cook it. We're gonna have to deal with that Rambam. Why? What's the big difference if I didn't cook it? If I cut a vegetable, I make an Israeli salad, right? No, if I make an Israeli salad, well, that's not tochen. If I cut it very, very small, he said, why is he using lashon levashlo? So we'll have to see what the Rambam's intent was with that word. And the Rambam says, in source 5, what does he say? Someone takes a vegetable, tol shereza tol is tochen, v'chein hanoiser eitzim, right? Who saws wood in order to benefit from the sawdust. Right? That's maybe what Rabbi Yagada, you were saying over here. He's making it to sawdust. He says, but you're not going to be chayim for that until you enough chips to cook an amount of an egg. Right? Right, that's just the amount that you're going to need to be chayim. But Lamaisa, he says the same thing by wood. So comes out right now that the Rambam and Rashi say that tochen can happen via cutting. Grinding can happen via cutting. Now we're going to come to the Rabbeinu Chanan. And the Rabbeinu Chanan is going to say that the word parim silka is not like Rashi, which means Rashi said is cutting. He says, Hai man de parim silka, pirush ke'en katisha velo ke'en chituch. It's like pulverizing or smashing, not cutting. Okay? That's what the Rabbeinu Chananel says. The Rabbeinu Chananel is saying that cutting is not considered tochen. Pulverizing, smashing. Okay? And he said the same thing. This salit silti, right? What does it usually mean? Solet. What does solet mean? Fine flour. Salit silti, right? It means pirish eitz atzay dekalim she'omdin. They're standing what? And they're layered in a state of flake-like fibers, and one pulls apart these membranes, and a fine flour substance emerges from them. The issue with the wood is when you separate the wood, there's dust in between the wood. So you're making fine flour of wood. So the sawdust issue, it's not just the cutting issue. So Rabbeinu Chananel, who's a Rishon, says it's not cutting. Cutting doesn't make tochen. It's pulverizing. It's creating something like a fine flour. And the Rosh agrees with this. The Rosh in source number 7, Rosh says, he says that this is referring to a palm wood layer in a state of flake-like fiber, and one pulls apart these membranes, a fine flour-like substance emerges. O Pirish Hagonu, and this is the right Pirish. Do me the Salka Saliti, Umaisha Pirish Rashi, the Parim Silka, that means you're cutting it, dak. Pirish Tamuhi, it's a big question. Davar Shu Oichel, it's something that you're eating, and you're cutting it. Ain't shaykh, but you don't have the ability to make grinding by cutting. So the Rosh and the Rabbeinu Chanano say that cutting will never get you to Tochein. Okay, it's the Rashi and the Rambam that says cutting is also Tochein. Mm-hmm. But the Rosh and Rabbeinu Chanano say Tochein means grinding. Grinding means I take my wheat and I grind it and I make flour. And anything that you do flour to, you make it to a flour substance, that is Tochein. However, the Shulchan Aruch would go according to the Rambam. And the Shulchan Aruch says, someone cuts a vegetable, dak, chayiv mishum tochen. He's going to be chayiv mishum tochen. So halacha l'mata is that cutting small vegetables is asur. It's the malacha of tochen. Okay? That's the Rashba. Not really. It's the Rashba. Okay, we're getting there. Right now we have to define what the malacha is. Okay. So
this is depend for the food.
We're gonna get there. Hold on. Don't skip steps. Right now we're defining the malacha. The malacha can include cutting into small pieces. Okay, and says the Bir Halacha on page 76. He said, "Yeshli zaher me'od b'zeh." She's very careful. The kvar kotzav b'sefer Yereim, the Rabbi Eliezer Mimitz, the shear, the kutan lo noda lanu. The small size, we don't know the measure. We don't know the cutting, what size. So you have to be careful. Because any size could be small size. And then you might be chai because of malacha of teich. So you got to be careful, says the Bir Allah. Okay, now, the next question he wants to deal with here is, which fruits and vegetables are subject to tochen? Are they all? Are they some? So we saw the Gemara brought down parim silka, which we said means, according to Rashi and Rambam, where we learn Shulchan Aruch, is that they cut the beets or the spinach, where we learn silka is. Okay. The Gemara didn't say any other example of vegetable. The other example brought down was wood. Is the Gemara being specific, or is the Gemara saying similar to beets? How far are we going with this beet? So, in fact, Tosfot, in source number 10 on page 77, Tosfot says, Davka b'silka shaykh tchina. You have tochen only by silka. Aval shar uchlin shari. But everything else is permissible. That's Tosfot. Obviously, halakha is not like Tosfot, but that's Tosfot's opinion. Tosfot's opinion, he said, what did the Gemara say? The Gemara said silka is the issue. It's very good. I don't know. He says that's the issue. Why Tosfot make that differentiation? I'm not sure. But Tosfot says that's the only thing. The Gemara said that's that. The Rambam. I hear you. But Tosfot says, no, it's only this. That's what he said. If usually you want to give an example, you would say like this and like this and like that. Right? You'll give a couple of things. Rav Pavo, yeah. Rav Menashe. Oh, right. What is he saying? Is he saying right? It's a good question. All right. So now, however, if you read the Rambam writes, "Hatolda hi hamalacha padumala meluha." Right? Ketzad mechatechet hayarik me'at levashlo. He cuts the vegetable very small to cook it. This is grinding. So the Rambam says vegetable to cook, right? And we saw it before. He said if you cut it to cook, you cut it small to cook, that's the problem. Why does Rambam keep saying to cook? Why does that make a difference? So the Kesef Mishnah, okay, who's the Kesef Mishnah? Yosef Karo, right? The author of Shulchan Aruch, the Bet Yosef. So the Kesef Mishnah says the dafka noket silka shechotechin ota dak libishul to cook it. Why? It's and the halach is also vu adin l'shay roka shechotechin otam dak libishul. Only those that you're cutting to cook. Okay.
Maybe when you cook it small pieces, you dissolve some food. This will become like
he says the Rambam is choosing that for it to be to cook, and then he writes, "So too, he says if you had a vegetable that you could eat raw, right, and then you cut it up very small to cook, that would also be a problem according to the Rambam. Seems to be that the Rambam made it that the Esther of Tochein is it's something done for achila, and therefore it's to cook it levashel, and therefore if you cut it up, no matter if you can eat it raw or not, cutting it up is the issue. That's the Kesef Mishnah. The Aruch HaShulchan wants to give a different understanding in what the Rambam means. He says that it's not the cutting up, but rather those which are typically cut very finely. Beets and cabbage are normally cooked. So it's more of what's more normally cooked. If you cut them, even if they're not going to be cooked, that's going to be the issue. Okay? So usually you cut an onion very small to cook. You want to cook it, so you make it small. You put the oil, you start frying it, right? Let's say I'm cutting it very small not to cook it, and it can be eaten raw. You say that would still be the problem. According to Shulchan, if it's cut very finely, even if they're not cooked. So anyway, the Rambam keeps throwing in this thing levashlo that it has to be for cooking. However, the Sefer Yereim, which you already to the Sefer Yereim, he already said, listen, you got to be very careful what size you're cutting it because anything could be considered small. But he then says, you're not allowed to pulverize fruits because of Tochein, even fruits. Okay? Now, go back to source number 8 for a moment. That was the Shulchan Aruch. What did the Shulchan Aruch say? Who wants to read the Shulchan Aruch, source 8? What did he say first? Right. Does he say Hayarik Levashlo? No. He takes away that lashon of the Rambam. He doesn't bring the Levashlo. Must be that what does the Shulchan Aruch hold? Anytime cutting something finely, any vegetable cutting it finely, that is already a problem of Tochein. And that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. What? I don't know what to really say, but they cut it small, I assume. Like Israeli sell? Very small.
There's both ways. There's parsley, you cut it extremely small. What about vegetables? You've seen it? Cut it down. What about the vegetables? Yeah.
So, and says the Mishnah Berurah that since he wrote it, umi the stam, since the Shulchan Aruch brought it stam, he didn't say lavashlo. Mashal, if you be roka shorei lo'achel chayin, gam kain tzvira the yesh tchina ba'oichlin. That you have this issue of Tochein by all vegetables, says the Shulchan Aruch, says the Mishnah Berurah, says the Yalkut Yosef in source 16. He says as follows. Some say that the Tolda of Tochein to cut a vegetable very finely with a knife, and a person is liable for doing so. But most authorities dispute this and hold that a person is liable only when cutting a vegetable which is inedible, which is you can't eat it when it's raw. And a person cuts it in order to cook it. Right? He wants to go back with the Rambam. By contrast, in the case of vegetables which can be eaten raw, and similarly regarding fruits, bread, and the like, one is permitted to slice them very finely. But says Yalkut Yosef, in the end, you should be machmer But basically, Alkid Yosef wants to say that maybe Shulchan Aruch is not arguing the Rambam. He didn't bring it down and say, he just didn't say the word to cook, but maybe he meant the Rambam, which means to cook. And maybe that's the halacha. But he says in the end, since it's a machloket d'oraita, you should be machmer, and you should not even cut something that is edible just like that. Okay, not gonna look at this lavashlo issue over here. Okay, so it comes out at this point that what? That any vegetable is subject to tochen. Any vegetable is subject to tochen. Now, we've said up until this point is you're cutting it very finely. And everyone understood this to mean that I'm cutting it on all three dimensions. I'm dicing. Now the question is, what about if I'm making narrow strips? All right, Julian. Okay, so for example, we have that carrot salad, right? So the carrot salad, you have very thin strips. They're narrow strips. Okay. I'm not cutting it on all the sides. I'm leaving one side very long. Would that be an issue of tochen or not? Because we were saying dak has to be cut very small. Is that dak or not? Rav Yosef Shlomo Yashiv, when he was asked this question, he brought a Gemara Masechah Shabbat Ayin Daled Amud Bet. Look at source 17. Rabbi Hamanda Aved, a basket. Person who makes a basket on Shabbat, he has 11 hatot he has to bring. He did 11 different melachot. And says Rashi, one of the melachot that he does, he takes the reeds and he cuts them into 2 or 3 thin pieces. So what does this mean? He's taking the wood, the reeds, and he's cutting it into thin slices, not in all 3 dimensions. And Rashi says, this is tochen. This is grinding. In a strip, yeah. Says Rashi that cutting it into a strip is tochen. So says the Orchot Shabbat. Right, but then we said to be machmer, and everything we don't cut. Right? At the end, right? So that's the way we pass, is that we're machmer. But now the question is, what if I'm cutting it thinly, but I'm not cutting it on all 3 sides? So Rashi, based on this Gemara, is saying that cutting it in a narrow strip, right, is considered tochen. It says the Orchot Shabbat. Look in source number 19, number 4 over there. It says one may not cut a vegetable into thin strips because of their prohibition of tochen. Therefore, it's forbidden to cut a carrot, cabbage, or the like into thin strips, as in a carrot salad. So, according to Rav Eliashiv, according to Orchot Shabbat, cutting it very thin and not just finely in diced form is also an issue of tochen. But right, at this point, we're talking knives. Knives, yeah, at this point, it's knives. The Igrot Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein, was also asked this question regarding the prohibition of tochen, regarding vegetables. Is it specifically when one cuts very finely along both the ledge, the length and the width, right? Is it both sides, as in grinding flour, or also when one cuts along the length alone, or the width alone, as people do with carrots, cucumbers, and tomatoes, right? So that was the question he was asked. He says that that tochen applies to making 2 or 3 stalks from only one in the case of making reeds into a basket. Says Rav Moshe, there's a difference when you're making a basket and making reeds into a basket. 2 or 3, it depends on the thickness of the reed, so that one can make the basket, which demands a thin reed, but not regarding foods. So Moshe makes this chilik between wood and inedible items, cutting it into narrow strips, and food items, right? For them, there would be no limit to this concept. He says, how can I cut bread, right? Well, bread is not an issue because you already grounded the flour, so grinding after grinding, we'll see about that. But he said, how would I cut anything? Every time I cut it, I'm cutting it on one side. So every time I'm cutting something, it's going to be an issue of Tochein, says Moshe. So therefore, Moshe says, it's obvious. El Pashat Sheboichin Shai Tochein Dafka Dak Lashon HaShulchan Aruch B'Yarek. So it says Rav Moshe, you only have an issue by food if you're cutting it dak. And dak means what dak means, which means very small size. Okay? So if you take a look on the bottom over there, it gives you a couple of examples. He gives you 3 pictures over there, right? Gives you the first picture on the left, sliced vegetables. That's big. That's no problem. According to everyone, not a problem. Okay? Now, in the next one, that's your chimche right there, right? That's your carrot salad. Okay? This, according to the Orchot Shabbat and Rav Yashiv, this would be also an issue of Tochein on Shabbat. But according the Igrot Moshe, right? According to Moshe Feinstein, you can't say this is Tochein. Tochein is when you're cutting in all sides, small. So therefore, this is not considered dak, and you're allowed to make chimche on Shabbat. You're allowed to cut it. You can't use a special instrument, but you're allowed to cut it with a knife if you're able to cut it that way. Okay? And then comes the Israeli salad. Okay? And we'll have to get into this Israeli salad, how one can make it on Shabbat. Okay. Why not? I'm going to take away my Onik Shabbat. I want my Israeli salad. Okay? Now we're going to come to what everyone said. I heard this, that if you're doing it before a Seudam, then it's permissible. So this all comes from a Rashba. The Rashba wants to say that it's derech achila, right? Just like by Borer, we had something called derech achila. This is the way you get to the food. Well, this is the way you get to eat it. You get to eat it by cutting it very thin. That's the way you eat it. So he wants to say it's a derech achila. So he says over here. It says the Rashba, source 21 on page 82. Mistabra. The ha de paris silka. He has the different lashon. Not parim silka, but rather paris silka. Okay. What's the difference between the two? How do you explain it? Yeah. Sliced. Right.
The paris is also sliced. Before.
Right, to make pieces. Right. Okay. Okay, so now he was lost in the paris silka. When you cut it dak, today, eat it tomorrow. Or even that day, but after an hour. That's when you have the issue of cutting it dak, says the Rashba. Okay? The fisha darcho shel silka lechatcho dak be'erev b'sholo, because usually you cut it in advance of its cooking. B'chol shedarko b'kach umenich lachar shah chayiv. Aval lo yichol miyad muter. But if you're going to do it right away, that's going to be muter. No one said you can't eat big. You have to eat big. You can't eat small. You can't eat small. It's not, I eat the size I eat, right? So it's not the size the issue. The issue is if you're not doing it for the Suda right now, you're not doing it to eat right now. You're doing it to prepare. And perhaps this Rashba also explains the Rambam, right? The Rambam kept saying lavashlo, right? To cook it. Perhaps the Rambam meant lavashlo means where I'm leaving it for later. Perhaps we can say this into the, because that's what he's saying here, right? He's saying what? Right? You're preparing it beforehand to cook it. Okay, so we already saw this by Borer. What's the halakha b'sfaradim by Borer? What's considered half an hour up to an hour? Up to an hour, a half hour to up to an hour before the su'udah starts. And it's only if it's necessary. Okay? That means if you have a lot of people coming. But if you don't have a lot of people and you just need 2 minutes to do it, then you cannot do it in an hour. Or even a half hour in the fast. It has to be that it's necessary to use that time.
I take my wheat crush it in flour? Right?
No.
Why not?
No. That's different.
Is that it?
That's different. So we're talking about cutting.
Make the flour.
No. You eat like this? What do you do? What?
He wants to say like this. This is what I understand. I understand Rami saying like this. Rami's saying, if you're telling me cutting is Tochein, and then you're telling me if I cut it right before the Suda, it's allowed. So then if I actually ground flour right before my Suda, then that should also be allowed. But I don't think that's the way the poskim understood it. Maybe someone's eating flour. No, but I don't even if it's true that you're going to eat it during the Suda, I don't think that'd still be allowed. I'll tell you why. I think the issue here is when it comes to Tochein, that's for sure. That it come to actual grounding, taking and grinding wheat, that's definitely Tochein. That's the malacha. That's the oraita. That's the ab. Okay. When it comes to the tolda is similar to the ab. Is when you take it and you make it small pieces. Okay, that's a problem. But now that I'm doing it to eat, well, guess what? That just showed me I'm not cutting it to small pieces to make it like grinding. I'm cutting it in order to eat it. It's no longer in the gather of Tochein. It's now gather of getting ready to eat. That's how I understand what the poskim are understanding. Yeah.
The token that he's talking about, you cannot do it. You have to put
Right.
Right? How would you take flour and stuff put it in the neck? Nice to shaya kataya.
Yeah.
One of the guys was trying to make fun of the new guy. So he said to him, "Here, take the flour." The boss says, "Take flour and start cutting it." He took a knife and started chopping like this. Chopping flour. Already done. Finding one side to the other. There's no reality to what you were asking. Nobody does such a thing. Even if you don't take a knife. You take it in kind.
And that you can't use.
Right.
And that keli you can't use. That's Tochein.
Not reality.
Okay. And he says you're allowed to do it before you eat. The Chinin Shamar Linyan Bar, just like we said by Bar, Kosher Achal Alta, whatever you're gonna eat right away. Kider Shadach and Shamli Adam Lachol, Av Mishesh Be'ota Tzad, Be'atzmo Chiyav Chatas, Shaniach Lachar Zman, Okay, so he says that's the halacha, just like Bora. So when it comes to Tochein, by cutting, you're allowed to cut your vegetables right prior to eating it. That's fine. That's not going to be considered Tochein. Now, in the Bet Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo deals with how to make a salad. Okay, Namsinu lemedin de mutter lichtoch b'Shabbat kibbutz yirakot shikorin, and this I guess is Spanish ensalada, right? Enchilada or ensalada? It says Aleph Yud Nun. Is that a shin or a sin? And it's inshallah. Inshallah. It's she. Okay, Anshe Shem. Okay. So inshallah. Okay. How do you make a salad?
Like God is almost like what do you think with the
Salsa. Okay, so how do you make salad? That's how is it mutter to make salad? Says the Ben Yosef. So here he gives you a few answers. Number one, he says, "Sheyachal alter." You're eating it right away with divrei harashba. Okay, and you're allowed to cut it very fine if you're doing it for right away. So that's one answer. And that's the answer we go with. Second answer, he says, the divrei hatosfot, b'pshita the kol shayirake, bottom is silka sharu. Every other vegetable you're allowed to cut. It's just beet or spinach, whichever you call silka. All right, everything else is okay according to Tosfot. According to Rabbeinu Chananel and the Rosh, the issue is only pulverizing, never cutting. Cutting is never an issue to the Rosh and the Rabbeinu Chananel. And according to the Rambam, the issue is for cooking and not for salad. So again, not a problem. And he says mincing. The whole issue is parim, right? Mincing it to very small. And when you make a salad, no one's making it that small. No one's mincing it, or whatever you want to call mincing is. He says no one's doing that much. Therefore, hilkach nera the kuli alma shari. You're allowed to make salad. Allowed to make salad on Shabbat. So Yosef, you can't. You said no, but everyone else says the Bet Yosef. Muta. I'm just kidding. Okay. So didn't he say no before? Okay. You said Israeli salad. Israeli salad. Okay. It's Hoser. All right. So okay. So we're gonna get into that in a second. So near the that you should cut it. Says the Bet Yosef. You should make it somewhat bigger. Okay? And you should eat it right away. And regarding anything like this, it seems that there's no concern according to opinion. So says the Bet Yosef, he ends up with two ideas over here. He says, number one, try to make it a little bit bigger. Meaning whatever you do regularly, try to make it a little bit bigger. And then also make sure you're doing it right away, right before you're going to eat it. Those ways, you're not going to have any problem. Okay, take a look at Shulchan Aruch. We saw this again before. You cut it, yarek dak chai b'shum Tochein. And says the Ramah, that's only bechotech umeniach. That's if you cut it and you leave it. Aval achlo miyad. You eat it right away. Kol shari. Everything is permissible. Just like bar lo achlo miyad the shari. So says the Ramah, just like we saw the Rashba, the Bet Yosef. Everyone seems to say if you're doing it right away, no problemos. Okay. Like we said, just like by Bora. Half an hour to an hour if necessary.
What's half an hour?
Half an hour to the start of the student.
I mean, half an hour from the time. Let's say I have a whole bowl of vegetables I'm going to cut up. It's going to take me, let's say, an hour to cut.
Oh, so now,
Okay. So is it half an hour from when I start, half an hour when I finish?
So from what I'm understanding, they're saying half hour from before the Seudah starts.
You didn't tell your left hand. When you finish that.
I mean, from the time you finish until the Suda starts, not the time you started.
I didn't understand it that way. I understood it as being you can start a half hour to up to an hour before the Seudah starts. Now, a lot of times, salad is not the first thing on your course, right? It's going to be other stuff, and that's fine. You can actually have the salad 6 hours in. You can't start an hour, the max an hour before the Seudah actually begins.
You have a lot of vegetables to cut.
I know there were Orbach and others say that as much time as you need to actually prepare for that Seudah, that's okay. But Chavadia and Ritziyosa doesn't seem to say that. They say it's a half hour to an hour beforehand. So they give that time frame. Yeah.
If you have a lot of gas, you prepare before Shabbat.
It's a good question. I don't know if it's masha from what they were saying to start from a half hour to an hour before. That's what it seemed to be saying. That's the way at least I understood it. We can ask and we can see. Can I if I'm catering for a big place, right? And I need to cut beforehand and I need more time. I mean, I don't know. Where's the rest of your workers? Why can't they cut with you within the hour? I don't know. I really don't know. If they're around. Okay, I don't know. Yeah, you prepare it in advance, right? On Friday, right? It's all prepared. So you just come and you plate. Okay. The Magen Abraham, in source 24 says he should even be machmer, even l'ochel miyad. He says, I don't know about this l'ochel miyad, should be machmer, but then he says that in our country, everyone does it. Everyone cuts it and everyone does it and they rely on this and they say l'ochel miyad, that's fine. So first he says to be careful, maybe machmer, but then he says everyone does it and it is okay. Now, Aruch HaShulchan says, I also saw that someone writes that if they cut onions 2 or 3 hours, this is a problem. He says, I don't know why it's a problem. If you need it, right, and there are many people, then it should be okay. Like Kapsir wants to say, if I have a lot of people, then I need more time. That's Aruch HaShulchan. And says the Mishnah Berurah, he says one should still cut pieces somewhat large. Right? Perhaps this is what the Bet Yosef was saying. You should still cut a little bit bigger than you usually do. right? So that's what he writes here as well. That's the correct practice, as the Bet Yosef writes. Nevertheless, but if you see people doing it small, you can't say anything to them. Right, everything we're gonna get to that in a second. Everything we're talking about is knife. But if they're cutting it fine, that's okay, because they have what to rely on.
Because it's in tune exactly what you need to do that. You know, that actually is considered like
well, similar in Borer, it has to be lochal miyad, right? Whatever you're going to eat now. So it will be similar to Tochein. I mean, you don't have to go exactly, but I think that this amount most people are going to eat. If, in the end, people. No, we said no. We said no. Chamavadia said no. You cannot do it from within. The Ben Ish Chai said you can. Chamavadia said you can't do that. It says it's a. You can't. You have to do. Yeah, you don't have to end the meeting, but it has to be that it's eatable, meaning that people actually can finish it, right? If you know it's way too much, you have 5 guests, okay? You're 7 people sitting, and you brought down 50 cucumbers. What are you doing? That's the problem. Okay? Is it possible for it to get eaten? If it's possible for it to get eaten, that's okay. But if you're bringing that, it's already at a double that you know it's not possible. Now you're just bringing it out to make the table look fuller. That's a problem. Okay? It has to be that it's royal achil. People can actually eat it now. Okay? Page 84, source 27. You shouldn't cut them very finely. And Mordechai Eliyahu said the same thing. He says, he even gives an example. He says, when you're making Israeli salad, what if one usually cuts tomatoes into 1 centimeter pieces, right? Source 28, page 85. He writes that on Shabbat, should cut them 1.5, okay? Centimeter v'chetzi. Okay. So he says, in that box over here, between 28 and 29, he brings the Chazon Ish and the Azad Nidberu, who say that one should always cut vegetables on Shabbat slightly larger than you normally cut them, right? Like Morchelio, like everyone's saying, cut it a little bit larger. Or Shlomo Zalman Auerbach takes a somewhat lenient approach, and he says that pieces that one needs to use his front teeth to chew in order to swallow is not defined as very finely, right? If anything, you're going to use your front teeth, then that's not considered small.
Uses the term merusak,
which means
crush, not the pieces. Crush is like a bit, like you have an orange bit.
Yeah,
those are considered to be crushed.
I'm saying that's small.
You can swallow it the way it is. You don't even have to chew it.
Right.
So it's that small. That's what he's saying. Don't.
So you take a look at source number. Take a look at footnote 8. He brings in the Orlid Sion, who writes that the sizes of vegetables cut for today's salads are not considered small enough to be problematic. Says the Orlid Sion that.
What is Nathaniel, nurse?
Yeah,
maybe bring the salad here, Israel salad. You're gonna be amazed how he cuts. No, but he doesn't cut it. That's why I asked. Please. He has like a thing, he puts it in, and he pushes it.
He has a machine. Right. So the Orlid Sion, Chacham Ben Zion Abba Shaul says no one's cutting so small that it's a problem. That's what he says. But others are saying you should still cut it a bit larger. Chacham Ovadia in Levi and Hein over here says that Mashsim Ran Bet Yosef Shenochon Davar L'Zahir Shlo Oisim Salat b'Shabbat, when you cut it L'Chitichot Gedolot Kitzat b'Shachol Alter Shebezeh Ein Kol Bait Michush L'Divrei HaKol. And so there's no concern according to all opinions, right? Kavah Katav Mamre Mordechai Kol Zehu Rak L'Revachad D'Milta. It's just to be on the safe side. The Chumrah Ba'almahi, and just cutting it a bit larger, the Bet Yosef said that's a Chumrah. V'aminik pasha the chatoch salat daktak b'sutot Shabbat al dat la'chol alter v'samchu al divrei harashba she'em mi shacholek alav. So says Chacham Ovadia, final psak is cut it as small as you want with a knife, It's not a problem as long as you're eating it right away. You don't have to cut it 1.5, a little bit bigger. You don't have to. You want to do, that's a chumrah, that's good, but you can technically cut as small as you can get to with a knife. Okay, as long as you're eating it right away.
Nowadays, you're not have
And he's saying the way we cut and make salads, we're never cutting that small. That's the issue of dak.
old days they had better.
On old days, they cut more. I don't know. Well, that's pulverizing.
That's what the Mordechai was saying.
No, but Mordechai was also talking about cutting, right? Hey, mutter lichtoch. Yeah, but look at the questions. Hey, mutter lichtoch yirakot l'salat b'Shabbat. Hey, mutter lichtoch salat yirakot b'Shabbat. It's nice yishanim gadol aragol lichtoch b'derech klal. Ah, shmei Shabbat kin chata. Okay.
This is how you use it. You look at the פירות הירקות שאינם מבושלים, שמרסקים אותם כדי לאוכלם.
Right, pureed. Osleraskim. Aber mutter lichtoch b'sakin chatichois gedolos. That. No, he's bringing two different cases. He's building puree, which is a whole different story, right? And he's bringing about cutting.
Define what is not crushed is cutting.
Yeah, but then he says by cutting that it's mutter, but chatichas gedolos ketzat. Ach lo yichtoch tak. V'yikvid la'asoy zoyt samach l'sudo.
In comparison.
What does he mean? Ach lo yichtoch tak. Not puree.
So what is asur is what we know is crushed.
No. That's not the way he's bringing it down. Bringing down this. That's not what he's bringing down. He's bringing down there's a case of puree, which you can never do, right? Aser of a mutter lichtoich, right? You're allowed to cut, but what type of cutting is mutter? No. No, that's not the way he started out. He started out. Gedilei karka hayim kegon perot yirakot she'enam mebushalim shemaraskim otam k'dei locham asur. Right? He's talking about fruits. What you're not allowed to do with them. You're not allowed to puree them, but you're allowed to cook them. Nothing to do with gedol ketanot to that in that part. Okay, it's two different. Okay, so that's halakha l'maaseh when it comes to cutting.
So it doesn't say it doesn't define what's big, what's small.
He's saying you should cut a little bit bigger. Bigger than usual. Like the Mishnah Berurah, like the Beit Yosef, like the Mordechai, all of them are saying the whole thing.
So it stays in the, it's like you.
No, Shichtam the Chatichos does kitzat, a little bit bigger than usual. That's what they're saying. Okay, the Ma'aser Chawad, you said.
Why do you bring the case of God?
Oh, it's just because that's another din that's going to come out later that we're going to get into, not today. Okay, now, so that's halakha, okay? That you're allowed to cut it as thin as small as you want with your knife, as long as you're eating it right away. Okay, so like borer, miyad, it's mutar. Now, grinding things which do not grow from the ground. So grinding things that do not grow from the ground. What's the examples of stuff that don't grow from the ground? Say again? You need plastic.
Meat, eggs.
Pasta's from the ground. It's wheat.
Meat, eggs.
Cheese, eggs, meat. Okay? Okay? It's not from the ground. So so page 87. Page 87, volume 19. Let's say a question, a Tzurba Sadeshin, okay, a Rishon, was asked the question. The Shayla was, someone doesn't have teeth well to chew meat. Some meat is very tough. You need good teeth. Okay, he doesn't have good teeth. It's hard to chew. Is it mutar to chop it up very finely, obviously with the knife, on Shabbat? Is there an issue? You're chopping it very, very, very finely. Okay? And let's say I'm not eating it right away, right? Let's say I'm saving it for later. So it's the actual tochen, right? We don't have the right away part. Is that mutar or not? And he says, Yira the Shari Kahai Gavna. It's gotta be mutar. Right? He says, why is that? Guarding meat of a b'shvasa, the enged lumina aretz, yesh loimer, the be'oichel kezeh lekuli amin lo shaykh, but there is no grinding by foods that do not grow from the ground. That's what he wants to say. If it's something that doesn't come from the ground, there is no issue of grinding. Grinding only applies to grains, legumes, and stuff like that, not by meat and cheese and eggs. The Tzurba Deshen does go on and say later, you take a look at that box over there, he qualifies his ruling and states that items that do not grow from the ground would also be subject to Tochein if those things are made edible only through the process of grinding. Meaning, if you have meat that you cannot eat, it's impossible to eat until you cut it into very small pieces, then that you would not be allowed to do. Right? It has to be that you're able to eat it like that, but it's hard for him to eat, then you can cut it. But let's take a look. Shulchan Aruch, source 31. If it is cooked, you're allowed to cut it very, very fine on Shabbat. Okay? Even whenever it is. Svara is already food. It's already considered what? It's already considered edible. It's already considered like that. We'll see in a minute. The Ramah says, you're not allowed to cut raw meat very finely before the birds. You want to put raw meat for the birds, you can't do that. Why? Then it's as if you're making it food. Okay? So says the Ramah that you cannot cut meat, raw meat for birds, because that meat wasn't edible until you cut it very finely. And that would be a problem. So take a look at the Mishnah, he explains it. Even in the case of someone who cannot chew it because it's hard, and it's rendered edible only through cutting, it's still permitted to cut it because the halacha is based on the majority of people. According to the majority of people, this is already food. I can eat it. Most people who have teeth can't eat this meat. This guy can't, so no problem. You can cut it anytime because it's not considered grinding. It's already edible. You already can eat it. But when it comes to other things, that since they cannot eat it at all without chopping, then the chituch makes it ready for achila, and that is grinding. Okay, so it comes out by stuff that do not grow from the ground. If they are edible, there's no tochen by it. Only if it's raw and unedible, and you need to cook, you need to cut it in order to make it edible, then you're going to have an issue of tochen over there. Take a look at Shemar Shabbat Kichatan in source 33 on page 88. But right, regarding foods which are not grown in the ground, it's submitted to chop them. But this applies to old times that we're talking about grinding. You're not allowed to use a utensil which is specialized for that purpose. Therefore, it's permitted to mash a cooked egg, meat, or fish with the tines of a fork, even if one's to eat them later on Shabbat. So I'm allowed to go and make my egg salad, so to speak, right? And mash the eggs, right? And I can do that in the morning for Sudash Shlishi. Not a problem. That's not considered tochen because it's shahakol, and I'm doing it with my fork, which is my hand. What? Why? What do you have to do for it? Yeah, what about it? Why not? Oh, he's saying it's on the ground. That will be lo'echel miyad. You have to do it right away. You would have to be able to eat it right away. What? Right. You wouldn't be able to do that. Right. We'll have to see about mashing fruits and stuff like that. We'll have to see about that. Okay, fine. Says the Yalkut Joseph, umitam zeh mutter lichtoch kavina b'sakin dak dak. You're allowed to go and cut up cheese very finely. You have a brick of cheese, right? You're allowed to cut it up very small, no problem. On Shabbat, even if it's not for immediate use, because there's no tochen by edible food that doesn't come from the ground. Okay? Always there's going to be no tochen over there. So right now, I'm going to go outside the Tzurba for a moment. Here in the Yalkut Yosef English edition on page 387, he writes here as follows, some examples over here. Right, but the meat we saw, the cheese we saw, he writes, however, it's forbidden to grate cheese with a cheese grater. You're not allowed to use a cheese grater. Okay? Likewise, you're not allowed to grate vegetables with the grater on Shabbat. Even though you're allowed to cut it with your knife, you're not allowed to grate it with a grater. Now, he gives here an example. Let's see what he has next over here. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch writes that it's forbidden to scrape it finely with a groove point threshing edge, a grater, even in order to eat it immediately. Why? Why are you not allowed to use these utensils? Why not? This is the way of the weekday. It's what you do on the weekday. Right? It's the work looks like a weekday work, therefore you're not allowed to use it. So you're not allowed to use specialized tools to grind things on Shabbat. Now, if you take a look at the bottom, you have 3 pictures there. So we're going to define which one is mutar and which one is going to be asur. What about the garlic press with garlic cloves? No, can you use a garlic press on Shabbat? It's a specialized keli. Okay, what about the 3rd picture, the metal grater with carrots? Using the grater, asur. What about this middle one, the egg slicer? Anyone ever used an egg slicer in their life? You used one? You use it? I've never seen an egg slicer. Yeah, you have Rami, you ever used an egg slicer at home? I've never even seen it until I've seen the picture here. I didn't even know this existed. I assume that, and now I figure out the restaurants have it so nicely cut up. Okay. Oh yeah, the egg slicer. Okay, so now the question is, what about this egg slicer? Is that permissible on Shabbat? What's the side with the egg slicer? Page 89, the middle one. Middle picture. Said very good. Okay. So let's take a look. He writes over here, Piskei Teshuvot. Let's say the Piskei Teshuvot first. What does he write? Such as a strainer, any type of vegetable chopper, potato masher, right? You're not allowed to use any of those types. Those are all forbidden. Since they're designed for cutting finely, or for mashing or crushing, and they involve the issue of Ma'at Ayin of the Dechul. Now, what about the egg slicer? Says the Yalkut Yosef that what mutar l'shtamesh b'Shabbat b'sakin mekatzetz beitzim. Okay, that's the egg slicer. He says mutar to use it. Okay, because all it is, like Chacham Tzion said, it's all knives. It's a bunch of knives. It's just knives. It's not a specialized keli in that sense.
They have like a kind of a slicer, but it goes both ways. And it's a frame like this. You put your vegetables inside, you push hard down, and it's like you're dicing everything goes, all the vegetables get pushed through this, and it dices all the vegetables. I don't know if that's.
You want to say it's a knife?
No, it seems like one.
I mean,
it's like a way to.
Like you make French fries.
But that's a specialized keli.
Yeah. No, but this is what he's talking about. Like the most squares, you just push it, and vegetables become like this. Come out all nice squares.
Okay, so take a look at the Shmirat Shabbat Kilchatai. Bring some Zaman Orbach.
No, but there it's cube. It's not just like it's not.
So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach makes a diak over here. He wants to say that what? That maybe a chopping knife is an issue also. He wants to say that where are you using this keli? If this keli is used in the process of food, right, like before it comes to the table, then maybe that keli is a specialized keli, right? But if it could be used at the table, then that's not a specialized keli. That's what I understand. He says, look, the egg slicer, it's a number of normal blades. And it's like a regular knife. And it will be permitted to use. And even if it's wires, they want to say it's still knife-like. And it's something that you use at the table. But the other types of instruments, you don't use it at the table, right? And therefore, it might be problematic. The Aruch HaShulchan had a knife called the hack messer. Tzion, you know about this hack messer knife? Okay, I don't know. So it's a knife that cuts very, very fine. And there was a question: can you use the hack messer? You say I can use the knife to cut, but the hack messer cuts. It really does a really good job. So someone could say that maybe this hack messer knife is the problem. The Aruch HaShulchan wanted to say no. A knife is a knife. I don't care what type of knife you have. Knife is a knife, right? You have one of the Japanese knives, right? It cuts very well. So he says no, a knife is a knife. And source 39, the hack messer.
I use a lemon squeezer, the bigger one, not for the garlic, but a lemon squeezer, not the bigger one.
Yeah.
Put the lemon squeeze, or you drink for a salad.
Lemon squeezer has to be also by hand. You don't use
but that is more comfortable for me.
You can't do that. So same thing over here. So it comes out if it's knife-like, and Shlomo Zalman says knife-like, and it's used at the table, then that would be okay. It's not considered a specialized keli. But if it's not knife-like and it's not used at the table, then perhaps it is a specialized keli, and you will not be able to use it. We have minyan? No minyan. Okay, and we'll end here for this week. Bezrat Hashem will continue next week. Okay. Ashakar.